So we'll try to allow you some time to get that done today, and then we should be good to go. If you have any questions during the class, please use the chat feature. I'll be looking at the chat room to see if you guys have any questions, and I'll interrupt Bernie appropriately. If you have anything else that you need to say, you can certainly put it in the chat. Any questions for me or Bernie, you can put it in the chat. You can use the emoji things to raise your hand and ask questions and those types of things that way. And at the end as well, so this is kind of a general reminder for all of us, I will pull up the LMS for you guys to show you where all of the information that Bernie has used to put this course together is located, so that when you go to pull, your information, you have those resources. So everything is already loaded in the LMS for you, and it's ready to go. But we can do that at the end of the course if you like, and I can show you where everything is. It's a lot of information and a lot of preparatory material that Bernie uses. And he can go over that with you as well later, but that's why we didn't inundate you with a bunch of emails with lots of different attachments and PowerPoints and that sort of thing. So with that being said, I think we are good to go, Mr. Mazzulla. So I will let you take it away.
All right, thank you. And so welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bernie Mazzulla. I'm an industrial hygienist. I'm now the Director of Health and Safety for the IUPAT. I'm very excited because I love the IUPAT. I felt like it was the family that I didn't know I had. So, and if I keep reaching out to Mike and Jesse, it's just because I'm starstruck that they paint for Disney. So at some point I'll have to get an autograph from you guys. So with this size class, I think we can go through and introduce ourselves because we only got like 9 or 10 people on so far. But so heat stress, thermal stress, it's one of the rubrics of industrial hygiene. I care about this one quite a bit because it does affect a lot of people. And I mean, personally, it affects me in my hobbies. I do these Spartan races and it affects me. I also do a lot of grappling, wrestling, and mixed martial arts. I've been doing that for 25 years. And depending upon what the environment is that I'm training in or doing an event in, I can be hammered. And as I'm getting older, I find out that my tolerance to adjusting to big swings in temperature is not what it used to be. And the work side, I mean, heat can really affect a lot of people. It's amazing. And as our planet's heating up, it's more so the fact. And we're going to get into some of these slides to that CPWR provided. And then as far as my, my background with heat stress in the occupational world, I've done a lot of work with it, especially opining and doing opinion and rebuttal for unions where they've had a lot of grievances filed by workers for not being protected from their employer or contractor from heat stress issues. And I've done that on Department of Energy sites where I had to address a couple dozen of grievances for one summer for the United Steelworkers. So I've got a lot of familiarity with it and monitoring it, measuring it, et cetera. So my goal is, to pass on as much of this information as I can to all of you here, because you can do a lot with an awareness-based heat stress course. Just making folks aware that they're not vulnerable to this is just a big part of it. And we'll get into some of that. So with that said, let's see who we have here on the class, just who you are, where you're from, and what your trade is.
Mike Russo. I'm from DC 78, local 1010, Orlando, Florida. I am a painter, but now I am the COVID and safety officer, health and safety officer for Florida. And I've been painting for 35 years, and I've been in my local 15 years now. Thank you. Thank you.
Andrew Swan, District Council 38 in British Columbia, Health and Safety Officer for about 24 years, been with the local for about 6, and educated beyond my intelligence, but still working at it.
All right. The more we learn, the less we know, right? Or the less you realize you know. All right, welcome, Andrew. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Nuno Portella. I'm the Health and Safety Coordinator with the FTI of District Council 711. That's in New Jersey. I've been doing this full time for about 8 years now. I'm a commercial painter by trade, and I've been in the union for about 15 years.
Okay, welcome. And I remember your face from a class before, so.
Yeah,
welcome.
some of the COVID class, yep.
Okay, welcome back. All right, who
Thank
else?
Jesse Pizzorni here from District Council 78, Local 1010. I am a commercial painter and scenic painter specifically by trade. I'm also have a educational background as well. Like Rousseau here, I was working out at Disney for a while. I also helped write the scenic curriculum we use at our Union Hall. And now I am the commercial painter coordinator.
All right, welcome. Who else we got on?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yep.
In the past, my computer hasn't been the greatest, so I bought an external mic. So this is its maiden voyage here. So hopefully it's working good. But my name is Adam Holmes. I'm the Director of Training for District Council 7 in Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan. 28 years into my union, and I've been the DOT for about 12 years now.
Okay, welcome. Who else we got?
Ray Spaccaforno, Apprenticeship Coordinator, Central New York with District Council 4, Laser by trade. With the union about 10 years, and in this job as coordinator since May.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hey, I'm Lisa Brooks. I'm out of DC 77 in Atlanta. I'm an industrial painter by trade, and I was just brought on this year as the health and safety coordinator.
Okay, welcome, Lisa. It gets a little hot in Atlanta. I remember visiting in the summer a few times.
Yeah, we're actually cool today, so
All
it'll
right.
be freezing before you know it. We have that kind of switch in weather.
All right, well, welcome. Who else we got? We miss anybody?
No, I think we're good, Bernie. I think we might have one late joiner, and that would be Frankie Jones, but we'll make sure we embarrass him if he joins us late, okay?
All right, sounds good. I'll let you do that, Nicole. And as always, thanks, Nicole. And if anybody else is working with her behind the scenes, thank you for helping me work this thing that they call Zoom. All right. So this is the designation here for the IFTI course for heat stress, 1146. So the way that I designed this course is it's a 4-hour class if you're face-to-face. We've got a really nice final activity with it, and we'll get into covering that activity today, but we won't do it as it was developed. What it is it's meant to go along with an actual hands-on activity where we set up some wet bulb globe temperature devices around different parts of a training center, wherever you're doing your training. And then students in their groups will have to actually go out and use the device, take measurements in that environment, and then come back and apply what they found to a work scenario. And then from there, develop a very simple work rest schedule and any other controls that they would want to implement to make sure that those workers aren't going to be negatively affected by the environment that they measured. If students can do that, you can be pretty confident that they got the basics of this class enough so that they'll be able to have a good awareness about if things are starting to affect them as far as the heat goes. Like I said, we'll get into it a little bit here. We did buy 2 wet bulb globe monitors for the IFTI. So hopefully once we get back to doing face-to-face trainings and stuff like that, we'll be able to actually have this class with those devices. And we can also use them too to go around and do audits and workplace assessments for high heat environments, around the district. So we have those things. So this class will probably be between 2.5, 3 hours, something like that. I'm going to take a break about halfway through. And if you guys got any questions, please, just go ahead and answer them. If you've got any scenarios or something that you want to add, please feel free to do so. We got a small group, so that won't be a problem. The course is developed into 5 sections. So we've got case studies, statistics, regulations and guidance, physiology, heat-related illnesses in treatment, work environment evaluation, work environment controls, and then the final group activity. The class is actually built with a little more weight in these first couple of modules because it's kind of building the foundation of thermal stress. Learning objectives. So at the end of this course, students should be able to define heat stress, heat strain, and heat-related illness, list 7 heat-related illnesses and identify their symptoms and state first aid measures for each, list other issues that heat stress can cause, list 2 ways that workers are protected from heat stress through regulations, list 5 heat stress control methods, and measure environmental conditions and develop a work plan to reduce heat stress for a given job. All right, this was a quote from the US Navy: outdated, erroneous thinking about developing dehydration tolerance, or that one's unit can stand more than another because they are tougher or more motivated, must be replaced by leadership decisions based on proven facts about heat and cold stress exposure. Even the military understands that you can't fight through heat stress. You can't toughen yourself up for it. It doesn't work that way. When the body gives out, it gives out. I don't know if anybody has Prime TV, but they had the world's toughest race on like a month ago with this guy, Bear's Grill. Spoiler alert, in the very beginning, one of the very first episodes, one of the team members from America, they kept saying he overheated and he was suffering heat stroke. No, if he was under heat stroke, that's it, man. They would be choppering him out of there because he would be on death's door. He was more likely suffering from heat exhaustion, which is a lower level heat-related illness. But once your body starts to, knock on one of these things, it's very difficult to get to, to succumb to it unless you actually put yourself out of that environment. So let's get into some case studies, stats, and regulations right now. So here's, I love teaching stuff with case studies because it shows what has happened, what we've identified and reviewed out in the real world from something. This one occurred back in June of 2006. The ambient conditions were 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty hot, and 21% humidity. Not too humid. It was a Department of Energy Security Protection training competition. So this is a contest. So these, security folks for the DOE, they were probably in pretty good shape if they were going to be in this contest, right? One of them suffered a heat injury and was hospitalized for 8 days. And again, this is somebody who's used to that environment. They're in probably pretty good shape to begin with, and they still, suffered a heat-related illness. Here's another one, 2004. It was 98-degree ambient temperature Fahrenheit. Worker was recently back from surgery, not acclimated, no training as far as heat is concerned. Complained throughout the day about heat and dizziness on a ladder removing some trim from a mobile office. Fell off the ladder just about 6 feet. Died from severe head trauma. Now, luckily for all the people that are surviving this poor worker, the medical examiner accurately diagnosed that the person died from heat stress. They fell off the ladder because of heat stress. They did have head trauma, but it was heat stress that caused it, right? Now, this is a unique case because this here was out at a Department of Energy site, and typically it's all unionized labor out there, but this is a very small mom and pop kind of contractor. I think it was like a five workforce. And these kinds of folks can slip through the normal rigorous process of qualifying people to work on these sites. This was a worker who just had surgery, didn't tell his employer about it, and was on medication that made them more susceptible. He was complaining throughout the day, including going indoors to one of the office trailers at the water cooler where employees were around drinking water now and then. And they were saying, "You don't look good, you don't look good." He's like, "Yeah, I'm not doing well today." And this worker was stopped twice while outdoors by different supervisors related to the site. And they said he didn't look good, but they didn't do anything to intervene. So this was a completely, preventable occurrence. So there's a lot of stuff in here that led to this, and it's part of the heat stress issue. Here we've got another one from 2006, pretty hot, up to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty humid, 46, 56 degrees humidity, 27-year-old construction laborer doing pipe laying, not acclimated, to the environment, suffered heat stroke and dies 6 days later in the hospital. Again, younger person, pretty good shape. And generally the understanding is folks who are in the construction trades are somewhat in good shape to begin with, because it's tough work. So you either enter in not in good shape and you become in good shape, or you quit, right? And you don't do construction work anymore. So it's a fairly rugged population just based on the constant stress that you have, just like whether you're weightlifting or doing jogging or something, your body does, adapt to that stress. This one here was a new one that I pulled, and this really blew me away. This is a Marine, 2016. It was a hot day, the unknown temperature and relative humidity at the time. Fairly young guy, 28 years old. He scored perfect on his PT exams. When they first measured his internal readings, he had 109-degree body temp. Anything that gets to 105 and above starts to cook your brain, and you can suffer irreversible brain damage. That's why it's very important to get that internal body temperature down. Suffered a stroke, 2-week coma, and required a liver transplant. So this was a person that had really big hopes and goals. This article, if you want to go to Stars and Stripes, it's still posted. And all that stuff was taken away from this guy because of, the environment that he was in, and for whatever reason, wasn't looked after, right? And even in something like this, there's still a supervisor that's required to look out for, these soldiers, and whether it's a supervisor for something like this or one in a construction site, somebody's got to be looking out for the well-being of that workforce. And it can't always be the worker, because usually if you're thinking about doing your job, some things might not occur to you, like, oh, geez, I'm getting too hot, or I'm feeling dizzy, right? So who do you think is affected by heat stress? What do you think when you think of heat stress? Like who succumbs to it? Who's affected?
Anyone and everyone.
Everybody.
Just from personal experience, last year, I believe it was, my daughter's former basketball coach's daughter succumbed to heat stroke stress. She was only 16. They had them out at the school running up and down bleachers when it was like nobody should have been out. So education is really a key to preventing that.
Yep. Heartbreaking case study, but that happens, actually quite a bit. Any other examples of who do you think succumbs to heat stress? Usually we picture athletes. Oh, go ahead.
I was to say, people who haven't been drinking enough water, definitely more so than others.
Yep.
Like she said, everyone.
Yep.
The elderly.
Yeah, the elderly. Yep. Athletes, every year a couple football players go down, some don't come back, from it. But how about these folks? Right? I mean, think about all the environments that you're in your trade. And I got to tell you, being a painter, one of the things I thought about coming on board with the IUPAT is it was exciting for me for a couple reasons. One is because my geek side of industrial hygiene really peaked, because not for nothing, but the IUPAT has a lot of different hazards that members face on the job, more so than I've been categorizing from other trades. Painting, it's all chemicals. Glazing, you got a lot of chemicals. You got heights, you might have to put on PPE. There's a lot of stuff there. So think about the environments that you can be put in, when you're doing your work. And what happens if you have to put on clothing then? Whether it's just cotton coveralls, or maybe you have to go to something a little bit more protective, like, Tyvek suit or something like that, right? So, workers are subjected to heat stress.
Yeah, I had to do many thermal assessments for confined spaces, and many of our guys do that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, in confined space, I mean, it can be amazing if you've got, outdoor tanks and stuff like that where the sun's beating down on them. There's no breeze. There's no way to reduce humidity in there. Yeah. There's all kinds of nasty spots. And the more aware you are of it, at least being able to go through a class like this, workers might be able to say, oh, hey, wait a minute, was this spot evaluated, or was my environment evaluated? Ask that question. An industrial hygienist or a site safety professional should never be upset with somebody asking, you know, can I see the work plan for this? Heat's the greatest cause of weather-related deaths from the National Weather Service. So here, you know, at the bottom, we see a bunch of natural weather events. And here we've got heat. So this here is the 30-year average of fatalities for the weather in yellow. And we can see heat, you know, far surpasses the other ones. We've got the 10-year average, you know, that's a little closer to things like tornadoes and floods. And then we've got just what occurred in 2019, which was a pretty bad hurricane flood year. As global climate continues to warm, we know that heat-related deaths have been increasing. This is from Berkeley Earth Center. And we can see as the date down here at the bottom, our temperature is rising. And then we've got fatalities here on the left side annually. Yearly average, about 702 people die from heat-related issues. 415 was the underlying cause. So what that means is like that case study of the worker who suffered a heat illness and lost his balance, fell off the ladder, right? That was an underlying cause. No, I'm sorry, that was a contributing cause. So he struck his head, but the underlying cause was the heat issue caused him to fail. An underlying cause means they actually died from overheating. So they went on to heat stroke, their body shut down, they had organ failure. But this is something to keep in mind, because think of all the places that you might find yourself where you need to be dexterous and have your agility, right? On ladders, different types of scaffolding. So if you're suffering heat-related illnesses, those things are going to be significantly degraded. And we're going to see some studies about that. So just beside the issue of having a negative effect from your body overheating, it can contribute to other things as well. Between 1999 and 2003, we have almost 3,500 deaths in the US from extreme heat. And you might remember back to this one, we did just have a massive heat wave again this year, but I don't have the data from it yet. But this occurred in 2003. In France alone, there were almost 15,000 heat-related deaths. There were 7 straight days of 104 degrees or more temperatures. And if you look at, you know, the upper European continent, they had 40,000 heat-related deaths. That is amazing for one season. And here, what we can look at is this black line here is the normal expected temperature for France in Paris at that, for those months. We've got June, July, and August. This is the actual temperature here in the orange. So when that heat wave occurred, you know, they were way out of bounds as far as, you know, the normal ambient heat. How about for construction and occupation? So basically, you know, we've got a number of deaths that happen in construction each year and in regular occupation as well. So there's 196 fatalities that occur occupationally, and 70 of them were for construction work for that year. Again, these things are in most circumstances all preventable. So these are 70 construction workers that should not have died. 196 workers in general should not have died from heat.
Hey, Bernie.
Yeah.
We have, it's funny you have this picture up. So we do a lot of bridge work up this area. And we have our guys out in the bridges in the summertime, inside containment with full suits on, blasting for 10, 12 hours a day. So imagine how hot it gets inside that containment. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, I've been in New York City during the summer. It is ungodly hot, you know, and once you start to put those things around. So I just got to remember everybody's names here. Oh, my Zoom's not showing me my names anymore. Anyway, so that was a really good example. So, let me go back here. So thanks for that example. And those are things that I want you to try to think about, you know, for your areas that you work in and live in, situations like that. And this photo, so I tried to grab as many photos as I could find for IUPAT painters. wasn't easy. So if anybody has photos ever of like an occupational hazard or something, and you want to send them to me, I can probably use them in some course, you know, that we're developing coming up. So please send them. You know, most of the stuff I got came from, you know, some of the newsletters, which I found some really nice photos in from different district councils. This is not me. I would not be up on this bridge. Me and heights don't go well together. Nearly all the construction heat fatalities were men. More than 3/4 were younger than 55. And most of them were white, non-Hispanic. So what does this say? Is there some bravado that might be happening and occurring to this? Because you can have temperatures affect different ethnicities and genders and ages a little differently. But you figure younger people should be a little bit more tolerant to heat. So what do you think's going on with the age difference?
I think you're exactly right, Bernie. I think young white males think they can conquer the world.
Yeah.
And if they just get a little, if they're getting heated up, they just kind of blow it off. I'm tough. I can make it through this. And I think that's what leads to a lot of these statistics.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
A lot of it has to do without being educated on how to protect yourself from dehydrating and all that other stuff, you know.
Yep.
They don't know how to handle the weather, or, you know, make sure you eat before you go out in the heat early, you know.
Yep.
Know the signs, and that's important.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, my father was a 40, almost 45-year, you know, union carpenter. And, you know, when I used to make comments to him when I was younger, he always say, Bernie, things aren't always as they seem. You know, he had a different way of looking at things because of his age, you know, and academic learning is phenomenal. You know, just being able to be brilliant is phenomenal. But something that's severely underplayed is experience, you know, so it helps being a little older in many cases, right? US construction workers are at high risk of heat-related deaths, and this risk has increased with climate change over time. This came from Sudong, from CPWR, that did a study in 2019. These are locations of outdoor worker heat-related fatalities. So this is for outdoor only. What do you notice about these? They're clustered in spots that, you know, usually have high outdoor temperatures.
High humidities too.
Yep. And we're going to look at why humidity is so darn important in a little bit. This is an OSHA complaint. I have this in there because it doesn't just affect construction workers. This was from a psychologist that worked from a prison system, and she was providing therapy to prisoners with mental illness, and couldn't get the air conditioning fixed. And so basically had a, you know, an office setting that was like an oven. And I just found this quote to be humorous. I'm sure the quality of treatment goes down when you're sweating sitting across the room from a felon who's sweating, she said. This is a person who had to file an OSHA complaint because of a heat issue. Here's some, you know, causal factors that affect heat stress. There's quite a bit of them. Age and weight, physical fitness, acclimation, metabolism, workload, use of alcohol or drugs, medical conditions, type of clothing worn, and a prior heat injury. And this is one that I want to draw a lot of attention to, where we're gonna look at all these a little bit more in depth in the class. But when you suffer a diagnosable heat injury, you are now more susceptible to getting another heat-related injury, which sucks because it's something that you now have for the rest of your life, like developing occupationally induced asthma, right? So it's something that you don't outgrow or get rid of. So we want to, you know, protect ourselves from that. These are findings from California OSHA. In 2005, they looked at heat-related illnesses. There was death in more than half of the cases of clinically diagnosed heat-related illnesses. 38% of them, almost 40%, required, you know, at least a full day of hospitalization. Let's see, we have a hand raised. Yes.
Well, I was going to ask about the acclimatization, because I know you were saying that you can't train yourself necessarily to take the heat more. So when acclimatization, does that mean that like the person should just learn to read their own signals in the heat, or they're used to the heat, or How is that different, I guess?
Very, very good example. Very good question. So yeah, so you can get your body prepared for a different environment. But you can't necessarily physically overcome once you start to develop a heat-related symptoms. So good question. I know those things might sound like they're the same thing, but they're different. So you can get yourself ready for working in a hot environment, and it gives your body a little bit more efficiency and tolerance. But once you start to suffer the effects of heat strain, that acclimation doesn't help you, right? So the acclimation helps you to
Gotcha.
work in that environment at a little bit of a reduced risk.
You can prepare for it, but you can't just like toughen up to it necessarily.
Right,
Gotcha.
exactly.
Okay.
I feel heat stroke coming on. I'm going to stick this out and finish the, it's not going to work. Great question. So what we see is that, almost all the heat illnesses occurred outdoors, and most of them had moderate to strenuous work. Oh, this is another interesting thing from this finding from Cal OSHA. Water was available 100% of the time. And yet almost 80% of the workers that were, diagnosed with a heat-related illness, 80% of them, for the most part, showed dehydration or insufficient water consumption. Sharp from Washington State looked at workers' comp claims from a period of 95 to 2004. And they found that about 34% of the claims for construction, this almost adds up to our fatalities that we looked at on those CPWR graphs. And then we see, public administration. So 16%, things like firefighters, police, medics, office workers, things like that. A fairly low amount for manufacturing, even though we've got some pretty hot environments like, foundry work, steel work, auto work. A little bit easier though to control the environment in those places though. All right, any comments or questions so far? All right, so what agencies protect us, from heat-related illness? We've got our usual suspects up here. We've got OSHA, CCOSH for Canada, the Canadian version of OSHA, where I usually go to get most of my information when I'm researching a new topic because they have a better website than our American OSHA. The Department of Energy, NIOSH and CDC, Washington State and ACGIH, California, another one I can add up there, has got some good stuff. What does OSHA say? Currently no heat stress standard, but OSHA will cite an employer under the general duty clause. In fact, in their technical field manual, section 3, chapter 4, they actually have a full procedure for an OSHA field officer to evaluate a work environment for heat stress. This is OSHA's current campaign to prevent heat-related illness for outdoor workers, water, rest, shade, which my computer is acting differently than I'd like it to. They borrowed this from Cal OSHA, basically. Cal OSHA started this program first. OSHA does have recommendations though for a written heat stress program that an employer should put forth. Lists who provides daily oversight, how new workers will gradually develop heat tolerance. So I won't read through all these, but they've got a number of things there. So, a recommendation for an employer to develop a heat stress program. OSHA has a smartphone app. So if you go to their campaign, website for heat stress down here, you can get the iPhone or Android-based app. Calculate a heat index, gives you a risk level for those variables that you put in there, and some protective measures. Canada has various heat stress rules depending upon the jurisdiction. So, if you go to their OSHA site for heat stress, it talks about what requirements are for those jurisdictions. They also have this nice working in hot environments health and safety guide that you can purchase. I think it was $15. I got one of these. We got actually a couple copies for the IFTI, and it's a PDF, or you can get the hard copy if you want. But it's got some very good information in it. Department of Energy. So we do have IUPAT members that work on Department of Energy sites. Like out at Hanford, Washington, I've done quite a bit of work out there. They actually, under their radiological control, policies. They discuss heat stress as it applies to radiological work. So like these folks here that are doing work in a high radiological area, they've got, different PPE on to protect themselves from that. They actually have heat stress measures written into those policies. NIOSH, they've created a guidance, a criteria for a recommended standard for hot environments. They originally did it in 1994, I think, or 1980. I don't know. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. Finally, they updated it, though, in 2016. This is what NIOSH gives as criteria and saying, hey, OSHA, it would be nice if you created a rule on this. And if you think about it, it would be a great idea because heat has the ability to affect all workers, right? 86. Look at that. My former self knew I was going to forget the date, so I decided to put it in there, but I forgot to click the button. Oh well. So it was a long time. What's that? 20, 30 years to update their standard?
The age of my husband.
33, Bernie.
33, right? So that's a long time. And NIOSH has been saying, hey, this is a problem. We still don't have a federal standard. State of Washington have some regulatory requirements. Temperature, radiant heat, or temperature humidity combinations. Workers shall be afforded protection by use of adequate controls. So Washington's got some pretty good state regulations. And, depending upon what state you're in, if you are looking at assessing, our members' work environment for heat, check with the state to see if they've got some backup for you, right? Something that you can reference. If they don't, I've made a pretty good run at things by being able to reference standards of care and professional practice from non-OSHA sites and regulations, making a good case for why an employer would want to maybe behave a certain way to protect their workers. In the case with heat stress, all the branches of the US military, including the Department of Navy, which has phenomenal research on the subject of heat stress, all have heat stress standards for their workers. Mine Safety and Health Association, they've got a standard for miners. So if you look at all these other organizations, you throw in NIOSH in there, et cetera, in a bunch of states around the country, it's a pretty good idea that you'd want to have a heat stress plan for your workers. Washington, again, has some good stuff. It talks about, for outdoor workers, they have outdoor temperature action levels, requirements for hydration, et cetera. So these are those outdoor levels for the Washington state, enforced from May 1st to September 30th. So these are the different action levels. 52 degrees, this is what you can wear. At 77 degrees, you have to, downgrade. And at 89, you can basically wear, t-shirt, some pants, regular work shoes, things like that. First aid for wildland firefighting. Also, obviously, if you're, doing firefighting, you've got a different element to heat exposure. So they've got some requirements for heat strain there as well. They also look at the hazards wearing different levels of PPE that are going to increase your level of heat strain. Now we come to the ACGIH, the American Conference of Government Industrial Hygienists. They're the ones who developed the TLVs. Here's one of their annual TLV books. If you join ACGIH, you get one of these complimentary every year. I think they're like 45 or 50 bucks to buy outright. And they have a threshold limit value for heat, and these are their removal criteria. So if you sustain for several minutes a heart rate of greater than 180, accounting for age, if your core body temperature is above a certain amount, recovery heart rate after 1 minute peak, if you are still at above 120 minutes when you rested for a minute after maybe you were doing some heavy shoveling, that's not good. So they've got some requirements to look at applying this threshold limit value and to determine if a worker should be removed. This all, though, it's pretty intense. It's not just, these things here. This is actually physiological monitoring. So here the employer's got to have somebody that's qualified, trained, on site to be doing this continuously around the clock whether it be in hour intervals, 15-minute intervals, et cetera, for the workforce. A weight loss over the shift of 1.5% body weight, that's a lot of liquid that you would lose from your body from sweating. Let's see, we got another question. Question or comment? Let's see. All right, folks, I've got 2:46. This is a good break. If we can just take a quick 5-minute break, get up, stretch, walk around, hit the restroom, whatever, and come back, please, at 2:51. We'll continue with section 2. And if you think of any questions when you come back, we'll answer them then. 2:51. Welcome back, everybody. Any comments or questions about what we covered? No, I mean, the unfortunate thing is we don't have, in the US, a federal OSHA standard for it. Hopefully, before I retire, we'll have one. But you do have some tools there. And what you want to do is, if you've got an incident at a site, you want to pull it together and cite and reference as many of those tools as you can. Because if you go up to, somebody who's responsible for protecting the workforce, an employer contractor, say, hey, look, we don't have an OSHA standard, but they're going to cite it under the general duty clause. You've got these 5 other groups that say this is what you should be doing. Don't you think we should have these controls in place? It's going to be hard to say no to you. I mean, I always look at things when I create a report or I develop an opinion. What would 10 more of me, other industrial hygienists, say if I was ever in court? I would want 7 or 8 of them to say, yeah, I would have done it the way Missoula did it. So if you can present, some evidence like that, it can help get you what you need, for the workers. With that said, I got so excited. I got either too excited about teaching heat stress, or that I had the Orlando folks back in here and I was dreaming about my Disney vacation next year sometime, I don't know when. I forgot to throw the poll question up. So we do have 4, I think, poll questions with this course to try to spark some interaction. So here's our first one. So if you want to go ahead and answer that one. Oh. Wow, Nicole, this is neat because I can launch the polls. I actually can see the results coming in real time. That's interesting.
It's that new internet you got, Bernie.
I guess it is. The cool thing with the internet upgrade? I can do the microwave now and it doesn't kick everybody off.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yes. Every now and then, who the hell's on the microwave? It would be me, one of the kids, or my wife. Who's on the microwave? All right, so let's see. Poll results. Are you affected by heat stress at your job? Yes, more than half. No, and then sometimes. Drew up the rest. And when is our next poll, Nicole? Is that with this module?
Yeah, I think it, let's see. I think it's like now.
All right, let's do it. 2
Okay.
polls in a row. How could life be better?
I don't know. Okay. Okay, I think that's everybody.
All right, close to 70% of folks worked for an employer that had a heat stress prevention plan. About 22% did not, and some didn't know. So this is something, again, regardless of whether or not, there's an OSHA reg for it, OSHA's got inspection criteria. We know they cite under the general duty clause. And OSHA now has guidance for employers to develop a plan. So, with that said, it's kind of, pointing in the direction of, hey, you should probably come up with a plan for your work site. All right, great. So let's move along here into section 2. We're going to look at physiology, heat illnesses, and treatment. And guess what the best treatment is for heat-related illness?
Drink plenty of water.
Don't get it to begin with. Like I used to ask my judo coach, How do I not get choked and go to sleep? Well, don't get choked to begin with. Thanks. So heat balance. So our body is constantly working to try to stay in balance. And with heat, there's some things here that are on the left side that are going to add to our heat load in our body. And then there's some stuff here on the right side where the body's going to try to get rid of the heat. And if the right side doesn't at least equal the left side, we're going to start to heat up. So when these things here are happening, we say that we're under heat strain. So we got environmental issues. We've got radiant heat, conductive, and convective heat. What's radiant heat?
When it's coming off.
How
of
could you
the-
define radiant heat?
Like if it's a hot engine, or if a metal surface is hot, and so it is then radiating the heat as well.
Yeah, so it's actual, thermal waves. Like we say, we have radiators, right? I've got radiators in my house. So it's actually heated up enough where it's going to give off a bandwidth of radiation. That's a thermal radiation. It's not ionizing. That heats us up. How about conductive heat? What's that? Conductive heat is why I learned not to go barefoot in Orlando while I'm walking to the pool.
It's like thermal heat.
Right, so conductive heat, you've got some item that's so hot, once you touch it, it's going to transfer the heat directly to you. So my feet would get burned, right? Or if you touched a hot stove, that's conductive heat. How about convective heat?
Isn't that the movement of heat from one place to another using fluids?
You could say it like that, yeah. In this case, the fluid is air. So what you're doing is you're heating up the air molecules, and as they float around, they are going to transfer their heat to you, like a convection oven, right? So it actually circulates hot air around, as opposed to just using radiant heat, where you've got the element in the oven, right, that cooks the top of your turkey only. So convective oven usually has better, cooking, because it's more thorough and concise. So these are the issues that can affect us from outside. Well, how about inside? So we've got basal metabolic rate and resting metabolic rate. These are things just from regular life functions, right? Sleeping, walking, breathing, sitting in my chair, it does take some energy. So unfortunately, we're not really efficient systems. So when we're using calories to do work, some of that is actually going to go to the work, but a part of it's going to go to heat, and that gets dissipated into our body. Thermogenesis, again, more of the same line, is the actual molecular event of things going on in our body is going to create heat. Now we've got muscular activities. So postural, daily living, average daily living activities, and then exercise. All these things together are going to send this scale moving down. And then on this side, we need to balance it out. So we've got these things, radiant, conductive, and convective, just like over here, right? So if you are hotter than something, like if you touch ice, you're going to transfer some heat in your body to the ice, right? Convective, you might notice if you've ever ran with somebody or did intense exercise and you're standing next to somebody, you can actually feel heat coming off of them if you're right. And then so they can be radiant heat and then convective heat again. So we can have heat that warms up the air around us and then moves away. But we don't actually dump a lot of heat from this. Most of it comes from evaporation. So how does that work? And it doesn't work so good in Florida. So evaporative heat loss, your body is heating up. It's going to transfer the heat to the blood, and that's going to start to pool towards the surface of your skin, transfer the heat into sweat, which gets out on the outside of your skin, and it evaporates. So if you are in high humidity environments like Orlando, or if you're in a dry environment and you put a suit on that's meant to protect you from vapors and gases, you're not going to evaporate much that way. You're going to have difficulty dumping heat. In fact, you know, I'll use Orlando again. I love when I'm at Disney, I will always take a beeline and go through a store because I go from a really hot, humid environment and I hit that air conditioning and I'm like, oh man, this feels good. It's not actually that temperature's cooler. It's just that the partial humidity level is low so that my sweat can immediately leave my skin and take with it all that heat that it has on it. So air conditioning helps remove that sweat from your body and it cools you down really quick. So this is really important to understand so you can evaluate a work environment and see what you've got. You know, do I have things that build up environmental heat or metabolic heat? You know, if you're, what's a painting task that is going to develop a lot of heat? Like what's a really difficult painting task?
Sanding.
Painting. But okay, so.
And yeah, sanding to prep for the painting, I guess,
Okay.
is always hard.
How about, is there a difference in, you think, physical demand from using spray paint to roller? Right, so you can start to look at the different job tasks within the trades and say, okay, this makes me work harder. If I'm working harder, I'm building up more heat. That's just the way it is. So you can start to evaluate some of the risk at your work sites. So this is a simplified heat balance. So heat is, S is for stored heat. So how fast this builds up. We want this to be 0. If it starts to get positive, we are going to enter heat strain, and that can lead to heat-related illness. So we've got metabolism for M, radiant heat exchange, convective heat exchange, and then evaporation. So hopefully, and you're going to see that these things here usually add to our heat load, right? So these things here are all positive. They typically make this bigger than 1. Evaporation is the only thing we got going for us that's a negative there that we're going to remove from this equation. So if we're stuck in an environment or a situation where evaporation is not working well with us, we can't evaporate or sweat, this is going to start to rise, okay? So once that happens, we're in heat strain and we can suffer heat-related illnesses. So this is the ACGIH definition of heat stress. It's the net heat load to which a worker may be exposed from the combined contributions of metabolic cost of work, environmental factors, and cooling requirements. So heat stress, kind of like a volcano. You've got a bunch of jobs with excessive heat, whether it's working outdoors in the summer, you know, you have a really difficult job to do. Then you're going to start to develop heat strain on the body because you're having trouble dumping the heat. Then we've got a bunch of heat-related illnesses, and the worst one is heat stroke. NIOSH cautions that workers suffering from heat stress are also more prone to suffer other injuries, like burns when you're cooking at a Jimmy Buffett concert. Another thing I missed out on this year. Thank you, COVID. Heat strain is an overall physiological response resulting from heat stress. Okay, that's how ACGIH defines heat strain. It's basically your body's attempt to stay in balance. Heat-related illnesses are the effect seen on the body when heat strain is not controlled. So once that S that we showed, you know, starts to get positive, we can start to enter heat-related illness zone. Computer is operating faster than I want it to. All right, so what signs and symptoms do you think you might notice if you're too hot?
Flush skin.
Start
that?
sweating too much.
Flushed skin?
Excessive sweating.
Yep. So a lot of sweating.
Nausea, getting sick.
Yep. What else? Maybe your dexterity or agility goes down, so you're
Right.
trying to manipulate
get-
something.
Confusion.
Some people get real grumpy
Yep,
right
that's
before.
right. Mood swings. Yep, good, good.
Big headaches. Headaches is always a big one. That's the first sign.
Yes, yep. So let's look at what happens when the body is placed under heat strain. So this is somebody who's at rest. You know, they're not working. They're not in a high heat environment. During both rest and activity, the human body tries to maintain an internal temperature of 98.6. So, here's our 98.6 temperature here on the left, and our blood volume means that, however many milliliters of blood we have in our body, it's at the right level. And we can increase that by adding more fluid to our body, and we can decrease that by taking away more fluid to our body. So after you start to work in hot weather, your internal body temperature starts to go up. There's a lag. We're not, perfect machines. So there's a lag between when we start to suffer a higher body temperature and when our body starts to react to it. So once it starts climbing up to a certain point, the body kicks in. We start to lose about 1 to 2 liters of water an hour, which it's pretty significant if you consider a 2-liter bottle of soda or seltzer, right? So imagine losing that an hour through sweat. And then your blood volume starts to go down. So you don't have as much, fullness of blood in your system. When you do that, it can't deliver nourishment to your muscles as well anymore. You can't take away the toxic byproducts. You don't have as many electrolytes where they're needed to prevent muscle cramping, things like that. You start to feel thirsty, but this actually takes place once you lose a lot of water. At some point, your body temperature is going to start to climb even further. You're going to lose more blood volume because you're sweating more. So around 3 hours of doing this without any relief, you can start to develop headaches, muscle fatigue, loss of strength. There's a whole host of things that go with it, and you've named some of them. So water is a key to cooling the body and, battling heat stress, as well as removing yourself if you are suffering, too much heat strain. So I mentioned this before, someone who has a past heat-related illness diagnosed is more likely to develop a heat-related illness in the future. So these are the heat-related illnesses. They can occur in any order. They can jump. So you're not necessarily going to go from fatigue, rashes, cramps, all the way to heat stroke. And rhabdomyolysis is actually something that can occur, in this area here. It doesn't have to be at the end of the line. That's the tricky thing with this. You can be, noticing that you've got a rash on your body. Next thing you know, you faint. Be aware of the signs and symptoms. Like we mentioned, you talked about mood swings, impaired performance, things like that. It's helpful too if you've got a buddy system in place, that can help monitor these things. So the first thing on our train leaving the heat strain station is heat fatigue. There's not really a cure for it other than just removing yourself from that environment, resting, and getting fluids. Heat rash is one of the most common heat-related illnesses. Basically, it's sweat that's not evaporating properly. So it's getting trapped somewhere. It could be like under the armpits, in the fold of a leg, between clothing that might not be very breathable. It's basically a diaper rash, right? That's what happens when, infants get diaper rash. When you do develop heat rashes, you're also more susceptible to chemical skin damage and skin exposures because those pores are opening up. Treatment for heat rash includes work in a cooler environment, reduce the humidity, try to dry the area, and there are some lotions and powders that you can apply to it to try to remove it. Next, we've got heat cramp, on the line here. Basically, you're sweating enough, you're losing electrolytes, and so you don't have the chemicals that your body needs to contract and relax the muscles. Cramps can be caused by too much or too little salt. There's an interesting phenomena of runner's cramp, where if you're doing marathon running or you're doing a lot of long distance running and you're sweating for a long time, if you just drink water only, the electrolytes that you have left in your system are going to be diluted. And so you can, develop cramps that way. So at some point, if you're in conditions where you're losing a lot of sweat, you have to understand you're losing electrolytes and you've got to replace those. So, at that kind of activity and effort level, a sports drink or something like that is a good option. again, removal from the work area with rest, water with salt replacement. And by that, I mean electrolytes. Potassium is better than sodium when you have a ratio of it. So you want to have something that's not mostly sodium and low potassium. You'd like to have something that's a little bit more balanced. Heat exhaustion, this is sort of the next phase. You know, it causes the body to lose fluids and salts at a pretty high level at this point. You know, you've been working for a while, you're under a strenuous workload. Fainting can be associated with it. Let's see, chat here. Water or Gatorade, which is better? Yeah, so use both. You know, Gatorade and those sports drinks, they were meant to replace fluid and electrolyte loss. You know, you shouldn't be drinking it as your daily beverage because you like the taste better than water. In fact, we've got some, you know, issues with teeth degradation with folks who drink a lot of it because it is more basic because it allows your body to absorb what's in it better. So it's nothing that you want to drink all the time. So if you're just, you know, regular hot days, you're not profusely sweating, you're at a low risk to heat strain, water's fine. But if you're getting to points where, and we're going to look at some of these risk factors, where you're getting on the moderate to extreme side, you want to be able to use, you know, a fluid replacement drink. Good comment. Let's see. So heat exhaustion, victim is usually conscious but may faint. Again, a core body temperature, we're getting over 102 now. Remove from the hot environment, give fluid. They should be encouraged to get adequate rest. This is something where you'd want to get, you know, medical approval to go back to work. There could have been some other damage from heat exhaustion. You don't know, right? Unless you're evaluated. So fainting, basically the brain's not getting enough oxygen because the blood pools in the extremities, right? Your body's trying to cool itself. So it's all going to the extremities to dump the heat. Not enough is carrying oxygen to your head, so you will faint. The opposite is why we experience frostbite in our extremities first, our fingers and our toes and our ears, because all that blood, you know, pools into our head and our core because it wants to keep those things alive and well. Acclimating workers to hot environments can reduce heat syncope. It won't prevent it, but it can reduce the incidence of it. Now we get to heat stroke. So here the body system regulation fails. It can't figure out how to dump heat anymore. It's tried. There's a number of factors that will combine to put a person into heat stroke. It's nothing that you want to try to predict your risk to. As far as, you know, if you're well acclimated, if it's so hot, you've got some general risk factors in work. And if you check the boxes for those, you can suffer heat stroke if you go into an uncontrolled, you know, situation in a high heat environment with a big workload. And believe it or not, based on what you might be wearing and what you might be doing, ambient temperature to you might seem cool normally, but for that work and what you're doing, might actually be very hot for your body. The Navy has documented case studies of members of the Navy suffering heat illnesses at 74 degrees Fahrenheit because they were wearing just battle fatigues, but they were doing extreme exercise. So it really depends, you know, what the temperature is, what the relative humidity is. You look at that Whipple globe temperature device that we're going to get into in a minute, and then what kind of work you're doing, and then some other factors, like are you wearing clothes that might prevent good evaporation? Some of the heat stroke signs: confusion, irrational behavior, loss of consciousness, convulsions, lack of sweating. So the skin becomes hot, dry, maybe clammy, high internal body temperature. Pulse is strong and rapid. Why? It's freaking out. It's trying to pump blood that's not available. The pupils become very small and pinpointed. Treatment, so this is a 911 event. If you think somebody is showing symptoms of heat stroke, don't wait to see if it corrects itself. This is a 911 event. Get EMS there immediately. Move worker to a shaded area, and outer clothing should be removed. There are some things that you can do first aid wise to increase the likelihood of not having lasting effects or death. If you can wet the area and make sure that water can be removed to try to dump some of the heat, rub ice packs on different parts of their body where heat can easily be dumped, like the back of the neck, armpits, behind the knees. Fluids, you should replace them if they are conscious and if they can tolerate them. So if they're vomiting things up, you have to know that, you can't force them to drink them. There is research on how we can decrease the likelihood of detrimental effects from heat stroke, but I don't know how many work sites you've been to where they just happen to have an ice bath hanging around, and people who are trained to dump somebody in that bath. And the prescribed method is you dunk the person in, you remove them. You dunk them in, you remove them. That's a lot of effort. And, the person can't necessarily get in and out on their own, right? Because they've suffered heat stroke. So although there are some things that we can do like that, you've got to be qualified to do so. And you've got to have the right resources at the site to do it. That's why we typically see this at, physical events like marathons or, sporting events, things like that. Rhabdomyolysis or rhabdo, basically it's the toxic byproducts of you breaking your body down to the point where it can't eliminate those products, and you've torn your muscle fibers, you've damaged the integrity of your tissue. Some of the symptoms: muscle cramps and pain, very dark colored urine, different than dark yellow urine. So this would be more like cola or tea colored. Weakness, you can't exercise well. You don't do well exercising, you feel sick doing it. You could be asymptomatic. So what happens is the muscle breaks down and the waste product leaks into the bloodstream. And once it gets into the bloodstream, it can be transported around. This also can be a way to potential kidney damage. Treatment for this: stop the activity, increase hydration with water. This again, it's a medical issue. You want to get, your healthcare provider involved. And those are the main heat-related illnesses. Okay, again, I have listed them in order of severity, with heat stroke being at the end, and rhabdo being sort of, something that can cross some of those. But you can jump the line. You don't necessarily just have to go from, heat rash, exhaustion, fainting, and then heat stroke. Any comments or questions on those?
Bernie,
Yeah.
quick question, and I'm sorry if this is a real basic question,
No.
but when you're measuring, is measuring the core temperature, taking your regular temperature the same as getting the core temperature? Since, is that something different?
Good question. So that is something different. So typically our like oral temperature or tympanic temperature is a little bit off, but it would be ideal if you can measure the core system. There's very few ways that we can do that to somebody who's awake. I am going to actually get into a couple of those methods later on, but that's a good question. But for most intents and purposes, we're going to take oral temperatures or tympanic temperatures to see how somebody is adjusting to heat strain.
And with that, how many degrees do you add to that tympanic or oral to basically guess, I guess, the core temperature?
Good question. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can find the answer out for you on our next break. Sound good?
Good. Thank you.
And those are good questions. You're welcome. Okay, so moving on. Somebody else have a question?
Well, I was going to make a comment about with the urine color and stuff like that, and you also with the poll you asked if our company or a company we worked for had a plan, our heat-related heat stress plan, and Disney is probably really unique that it does. And even when I would work at the water parks, and you go to the employee bathrooms where a lot of the lifeguards would be using the bathroom. If you go in the stalls, you sit down, and on the back of the stall is a chart of urine colors for you to check, to make sure you're staying hydrated. They really did push that, which is good, especially being that it was so hot. But I always thought that was kind of funny. And you sit down, it's got a chart right there for you to compare your urine color. And I always thought it was wild, though. They would show the darks, like the Cola T1, and they're like, call 911 if this one happens.
Yeah.
And I was like, what would cause that to happen? So it's kind of interesting having that question
Being
answered.
yourself unmerciful is how that happens.
Like, what is going on there?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Most professional elite athletes don't suffer rhabdomyolysis. You got to really put yourself through a grueling workout to do it. And it doesn't do your body any good because you don't develop a tolerance to that. So it's not like, if I'm lifting weights, one day I can, deadlift 400 pounds and, a year later I can do 450. No, it's not like I can tolerate rhabdo any better. So that's not anything. There's no benefit to pushing yourself to that level. In fact, you're going to be taking time away from the activity.
Right, exactly. Isn't it opposite? Because if you expose yourself or you get one of these once, then you're more likely to get them again. You're not like building up a tolerance or anything.
Yeah. Yep. The ego. The ego is the progress killer, I like to say. All right, so let's move on here and then we'll take another break shortly. So heat stress, as you can imagine, can lead to other health and safety issues, reduce work, performance, increase accidents. There are some reproductive problems that can come into play if your body's under heat strain, heart and lung strain. So if you've got underlying conditions like a heart condition, hypertension, that can affect you like that as well. And then there's some synergistic effects with certain chemicals where you're not going to be able to tolerate the heat as well. This here is a study from NASA. So they looked at ambient temperatures, 75, 80, 85, 90, et cetera. And they looked at percent loss work output and percent loss in accuracy. And look at once you start to get to 85, you significantly lose output and lose accuracy. Once they get to 90, I mean, it gets, almost to be comical, right? So, I mean, imagine if, some of the things that you might have to do as an astronaut, if you want to have a significant loss in accuracy like this, you don't want to put them in a high heat environment without controls. Heat stress affects helicopter pilots. This is just another study that they looked at Israeli helicopter pilots. They looked at 500 of them and found that there was a dose response relationship to how well they performed flying a helicopter in heat environments. So as the ambient heat rose up, their performance operating a helicopter went down. That doesn't sound so good to me. So a work rest schedule can greatly reduce the amount of productive work that you can do. And I know, you might be in an environment where production is important. And believe it or not, production without giving the right manual resources, so without putting enough workers on that job, actually is a health risk of its own. If you're asking a small workforce or an inadequate workforce to go so fast, to push the pace, to get as much production as you can, don't you think that might increase risk to accidents, heat illnesses, maybe inaccuracies in the job you're doing? So that's something that unions have been actually looking at over the last 20 years is, hey, let's get the right amount of workers to this job to do it. Don't ask 10 of us to do a job that we should have 15 of us here to do in a week, right? Because that's going to increase our accidents. So with that said, my point of that actually is, so, you can actually get better productivity out of somebody if you have a good, appropriate work rest schedule. Even though you might be working for 30 minutes and resting for 30 minutes, what good is it if you put the bulk of your workforce out of work for a couple of days because of heat exhaustion or heat stress? Exposure to excess heat at work can also increase risk of having a baby with birth defects. Workers exposed to heat may be at risk for other health issues. So we've got plenty of research that shows that heat can relate to a lot of different detrimental issues for workers, depending upon what kind of medications you're taking, or if you want to call margaritas medications, right? If nothing gets me to cut down my drinking more than when I start to run again. because I hit the trail and I'm like, God damn it, this sucks. I'm not drinking like that again for a while. So, you know, depending upon what you're putting into your body can have a significant issue on your tolerance to heat. Medical risk factors for heat-related illness. Again, there's all kinds of things that we can relate to having a more detrimental effect if you've got some of these things and you're working in high heat environments. And think about just what you might eat. You know, again, you know, they tell you don't go swimming for 45 minutes if you just had a meal. Well, why? Anybody know the reason? Not because you're heavier, even if you had a steak.
Cramps. I always
Cramps, yeah. Why would you cramp up?
Is sudden changes the temperature, something that your body core temperature changes?
No.
Okay.
So good try though. So when we take food into us, all the blood needs to go to our gut to help digest it and metabolize it, right? So just like with frostbite on our fingertips and toes, if all the blood is pooling in our digestive tract, is enough blood available to our limbs to produce muscular work and output, like swim? So, I mean, there's a reason why, right? You hate having you hate to give a lecture to students when the class comes back right after lunch, right? Usually it's, hey, can we find like a group activity for them to do or something so they don't fall asleep and stop paying attention? So when you're digesting a big meal, it's not that good for tolerating high heat environments because all that blood is getting to our core to try to digest stuff. And you're asking your body to pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time. And actually, we're not very good at doing that. Just try texting and driving if you don't believe me. No, don't do that. Do not try texting and driving, right? We know it doesn't work out. Actually, you have more accidents if you text and drive than if you're driving under the influence. Amazing, right? So we want to be careful of what we're putting into our body and what we're asking ourselves to do out on that work site. This is a list. And again, I gave folks this reference, this heat stress control and heat casualty management from the Department of Defense, 2003. Excellent resource to learn a lot about heat stress. These are different drug classes and proposed mechanism of action, why it is that they contribute to heat-related illnesses. This is a small list. You know, there's more things in here, but this is what I could fit on a slide. Work-related construction factors also increase heat-related illnesses. I bet you could come up with a bunch of these things, right, for your different trades. Tools and machinery, you know, what kind of tools and machinery you're using might require different physical output from you, right? Imagine the difference between using a small shovel and a big shovel. One you can fit a lot more material on, right? That's going to cause you to work harder. Elevated surfaces, heavy workloads, you know, simple accommodations, temporary employment. So maybe you're not used to working in that environment. That's why I'm not a big fan of temp labor and I'm a fan of union labor. Let's give people, you know, long-lasting skilled jobs. If you're throwing somebody into an environment they're not used to, you know, they might not be able to even make it through the day. And if they do, I'd hate to see how they feel the next day. Direct sunlight, right? If you're working outdoors in direct sunlight, you know that old adage, oh, it's 10 degrees cooler in the shade. Yeah, it's true, it is. And then PPE requirements, like this, you know, member up here, right? If you're moving just from a t-shirt, you know, and jeans to coveralls, full coveralls, to Tyvek suit, you're greatly decreasing your body's ability to dump that heat. So these are all things that you want to look at. And there's other things that we can look at too. You want to look at these when you're evaluating the work site for heat stress risk. All right, any comments or questions? All right, we're at 3:30. Let's take a 5-minute break. The next two modules are a little bit shorter, so we'll go through those. If we need to take another break after that, we will. If not, we'll get right into looking at that activity. So why don't we come back at 3:35? Sound good? All right.
Having a full meal because the body the blood tries to go to that, or is that something different?
I haven't heard of that, Lisa. If you could maybe track down where you heard that from, just so we can find a reference. If you can give cold water, it's going to help absorb some of the heat from the tissue. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, no, this is just more, I guess layman's people have said, not medical reference or anything like that. So I was just wondering if there's some truth to that or not.
Well, then that's a really good question. So again, a lot of times I hear stuff, that's not based on, science and reality. And as EHS folks, health and safety people, we want to make sure that we're passing the right info on. So if you ever have questions and things like that, track down the resource, track down the answer. You're always free to, reach out to me, and ask. And thank you for asking another question, because I just remembered I was supposed to answer you one about the temperature. So Lisa, it looks like according to the National Institute of Health, the oral temperature can be off as much as a half to a degree Fahrenheit, which, it depending upon what you're looking to measure or prevent, could be too much. So there is a difference. Other ways that we can measure temperature, you can do a rectal temperature, which I don't know any workers that are going to okay that. Also bladder temperature, same thing. You don't want to be awake for that. There's something called a core temp pill, and I have a photo of that. It's the size of like a large vitamin that you swallow, and it's actually a thermometer that can radio transmit out its readings. And then there's like temporal dots that you can put on that measure temperature that way. And there's actual suits, there's tight fitting suits that can take a bunch of physiological readings, including temperature. They all have different levels of accuracy and cost with them. And we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay, is it, well, the one that they stick in kids' ears, that's
Yep.
probably about the same degrees,
Yeah.
plus or minus,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, about a half to one. So so what I'll do is I will, it's actually a good question. I'm going to actually, you take your question, I'm going to update the slide to talk about the differences. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the National Institute of Health studies on it for health promotion. So I'll actually update a slide thanks to you. All right. With that said, Nicole, are you there?
I wasn't going to say anything, and I was just going to launch the poll.
That would have been good. All right, another poll. Has anyone had a heat-related illness either on the job or off the job? Hey, Jesse, if you have photos of some of the cool projects that you have your students do and stuff like that, I'd love to get a couple.
I actually just got a flyer in the mail today. Just a minute ago on a break, I saw it, and it was using one of the same photos. This is from IUPAT. It was using one of the same photos that you were using in the slideshow. I was like, I just saw this photo of the guys on the pole, on the bridge. Who you were like, that wouldn't be me up there.
No,
I
it
saw
wouldn't be me.
that picture somewhere else in a flyer I passing out.
Yeah, if you got any like cool scenic,
Oh, yeah.
photos and stuff like that, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I'll show my
I have a
kids.
lot of- Yeah, I'll definitely send some over for sure.
Yeah, no, I finished a 14 by 12 foot shed this summer, and I put a metal roof on it. And I got stuck up there. I'm like, God damn it, I don't have my cleats on there at the end. So all I got is a ladder. I'm gonna slide off this thing. So I'm sitting there yelling for my son who's mowing the lawn to come and hold the damn ladder. So I was up there for like 5 minutes, and then I started yelling to my wife, who I could see in the window. And I'm like, what took you guys so long? My wife's like, oh, I thought it was just the neighbors yelling. Me and Heights, man, it don't work. It just do not work. So what do we got for results here? So 33% said yes, 67% said no. So I've suffered a heat-related illness off the job and my activities, and it's not fun. When I was down for a couple days after. So again, stuff that's really presentable, even if you're trying to do like high-end athletics or something, there's a way that we can do that, get you to that next level of achievement without having people, suffer heat-related illnesses. And as far as workers, a lot of the opinion that I had to do in rebuttal for the steel workers was because the ACGIH TLV showed that you should be working for 15 minutes and resting for 45. And the contractor did not want to do that because they weren't going to be able to meet their milestones, and that would have affected their bonus. So people got hurt, So if you want to do it the right way, sometimes that might mean extra time. Or if you want to complete it faster, bring more workers onto the job, So let's not have to suffer a heat-related illness. All right, let's get into work environment evaluation. So you must evaluate environmental factors and work conditions in order to select proper controls. And just checking an ambient temperature is not enough to do it for health and safety reasons for occupations. You've got to measure at the site of work. So, it's not okay. I remember, I actually taught this class at a Department of Energy site out at a desert. And I actually had an industrial hygienist taking the class, and they're like, oh yeah, it's easy for me. I monitor them all day. I'm like, oh, you're at the site all day? That's cool. They're like, oh no, I just look out my window. I'm like, what do you mean you look out your window? Well, I put the wet bulb globe temperature device outside my window of my trailer. I'm like, well, where's the work site? And they're like, well, it's like 15 miles away from where I am. So it's not appropriate. OSHA says you've got to take measurements, at the site of work. So this is a wet bulb globe temperature device. Again, we bought a couple of these for the FTI. So we've got a normal temperature, which is up here, normal temperature device. We've got the wet bulb, which is right here. And you fill that little cup up with water, and that's going to measure evaporative temperature. And then we've got globe temperature, which is right here, which is going to measure radiant heat. And all three of these things combined are going to give you an adjusted wet bulb globe temperature value. That's what you'll use in the ACGIH TLV or other work rest schedules like that, and for your planning. There is a way that you can actually calculate it out individually. You can take the wet bulb, the globe, and the dry bulb temperature, and you just take whatever reading that is, multiply it by 0.7, add that to the globe temperature, multiply it by 0.2, and the dry bulb, multiply it by 0.1. You add those together, you get your reading. But that thing does it for you. You can also do it without direct exposure to the sun by removing the dry bulb. You can also look at developing some assessments with sling psychrometers or a slychrometer. And then you can apply those to a psychrometric chart. So, although I wouldn't recommend doing this, I would just go and get a wet bulb globe temperature device. Basically what you're going to do is you dip these things in water and then you twirl them around, and based on the relative humidity, it's going to give you an ambient temperature and a relative humidity adjusted temperature. And with the psychrometric charts, this is kind of hard to see, but I wanted to throw one up there just so we'd have it on the screen. This would work better if we were face to face. So if you know any two values, you can determine the other values. So if you knew a dry bulb temperature and relative humidity, I can find out, volume of air, humidity ratio, wet bulb temperature, and saturation and dew point temperature as well. So you just take those, I would take a dry bulb if it was, say 25 degrees, and I had relative humidity of, let's see if I can find it here, 10%. So I cross that right here. So these are where 10% relative humidity and 25 degrees Celsius dry bulb is. And from there, where'd my mouse go? It's right here. I can determine these other values. I'm pointing at the screen like you can see me. So you can see these other values by going over to the different areas on this chart. But that's not how, I would actually take readings and assess a work environment. I would use that wet bulb globe temperature device. We talked about this already. You might be wearing something other than basic work clothes, right? So depending upon that, if you're using the ACGIH TLV, if you've got double coveralls, cloth woven material, or some summer work uniform. So here we've got t-shirt and pants. This is basically what I would assign to your painter coveralls, right? If they cover your legs and arms fully. And this would be something like a double coverall or woven material. I would add this on. So let's say if my wet bulb globe reading was, I don't know, 35. And if I was wearing double coveralls, that new reading would then be 40. Because I'm taking my wet bulb globe temperature adjusted device reading, and I would add that to an adjustment for the kind of clothes I'm wearing, and that would increase it. So you have to make sure that you're accounting for what that worker is wearing. We always want to actually assess the environment with a measuring device. However, never avoid warning signs from workers. You don't want to get into a situation where you've got an employer says, okay, you should be good to work in that environment. And you're like, no, I don't feel good. I'm not sweating really. I'm feeling nauseous. Oh, you should be fine. The measurement says that you're fine. No, don't do that. Remember, we said that there's going to be individual cases where people are suffering heat-related illnesses differently than their coworkers. So we have to make sure that we're prepared to address that. This is just a basic humidity and temperature risk assessment, right? We've got humidity on one side, temperature on the other, and it gives us a sort of danger zones. Here's NOAA's National Weather Service Heat Index. You've probably seen this flash up on the weather channel, right? Or if your local news is looking at the weather and they're talking about heat waves, you might see something like this, where it's basically, cautious to danger zone, depending upon the relative humidity and the ambient temperature. Here's the Canadian Humidex. It's similar. So we've got relative humidity and temperature in degrees Celsius, and we've got, degrees of comfort. And they go a step further, where if you look at that color coding with the Canadian Humidex, we've got different responses depending upon where that level of risk is. For instance, if it's 45 and over, only medically supervised work can continue. And here we've got different levels of work in acclimatization. They also have a heat stress awareness tool. And you can find all that stuff on the CCOSH site under the reference for heat. This is a copy of the ACGIH heat strain TLV. So basically, we start off, might be a little hard to see, so I'll read it out. Heat stress expected, yes, you move down. Clothing adjustment factor available. So for instance, that adjustment factor, you're wearing double coveralls, you'd add 5 degrees Celsius. If that's a yes, you can keep going down. If there is no documented adjustment factor for what that worker's wearing, you got to go all the way down, and then you have to implement physiological monitoring. So that's, temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, all that stuff. But basically it's a step-by-step process to make sure that you're going to keep a worker out of a heat strain related environment. It's essential to classify or measure workload accurately to effectively apply work rest controls. So this is an issue that I had to do a lot of work with the steelworkers on that Department of Energy site out in Portsmouth, Ohio, because they had a work rest schedule implemented, but the work that they were doing, the supervisors were left up to classify it, and they classified it as light. So they had a 15-minute rest, 45-minute on schedule, but it should have been flopped. What they were doing was they were cutting out by hand all these large, humongous pieces of radiological material refining equipment. They had to sawzall by hand the big steel feet that these equipment were attached to the ground in, and also disconnect those things from the ground. That is heavy work, and they were classifying it as light work, so not appropriate. So we were able to put together a proof that showed that that work should be heavy. So if you have the metabolic rate misclassified, you are not going to be giving workers the appropriate work rest schedule. That's why I think it is imperative that workers are involved in this process, because who knows the work better? Who knows painting work better than a painter? Who knows glazing work better than a glazer, right? Get workers involved on that site. And this is some example, right, of different levels of work category. NIOSH recommends that employers institute a medical monitoring program for all workers who are or may be exposed to heat stress above recommended action limits from that ACGIH TLV. So again, they're telling you don't leave it up to chance, right? If you know that you're going to hit an action limit, which is typically half the value of an actual exposure limit or a recommended exposure limit, do physiological monitoring. Make sure you've got someone qualified and trained on site to do that. These are some of the devices that you can use to take those monitoring. So, a scale for body weight. And again, this one's very reactive because now you're waiting for a worker to sweat off pounds of fluid, right, before you decide to remove them. This is an example of that core temp pill that you swallow. And then this device here would actually be able to pick up the transmissions of what that core body temperature is. And it takes about 8 hours to go from your mouth to the toilet. It's not reusable. Once you swallow one of these things, it's gone. You can have heart rate monitors. Here's a tympanic membrane temperature device, a pulse O2 meter. So there's different ways that we can take measurements on workers to see how they're, doing with heat strain. Any comments or questions? All right, next one, work environment controls. Nicole, do we have another poll? We do. Have you ever tried to control heat stress on the job? All right, so 89% of us have and 11% of us have not. For the folks who did try to control heat stress on the job, what were some of the barriers to the things that you tried to implement? What did you try doing, and what was a barrier of trying to implement that?
We'd often try to implement these like pop-up tents to keep the sun off of you here. One of the barriers, though, is that they're not easy to necessarily set up, and they're much harder to get to and from a job site. They're very heavy, and at Disney or at certain places, I mean, sometimes you just can't have it. Other times it's just hard to get it to where you're going. Or you're moving around so much, it doesn't make it really usable because you have to move constantly.
Okay, good.
There's times where you have to schedule your work properly, try to do things outside when it's a little cooler, go inside when it starts to get warmer, keep your people safe.
Yep.
We've had jobs where we had those fans with that literally project that mist, that cool mist right around where the guys were working.
Okay. Anything else? All right, so so some of these things we mentioned, you can implement these controls outside of a worker having to do anything, right? But some of these things, unfortunately, it's behavior based, and we all know how good we are at abiding by good behaviors. I will be the first to tell you, a lot of my best laid plans for myself don't work out so good. So you have to come up with some creative ways. What do you think is better, to tell a workforce, hey, make sure you're getting, a drink of water every hour? Or do you think it would be better to say, at the start of every hour, you got 5 minutes, go get a drink? Right? So leaving it up to their own devices may not work. They might forget. They might feel intimidated because they've got a supervisor who likes to rag on them. There's a bunch of reasons. But if you can find creative ways to implement some of these controls that coincide with somebody behaving a certain way, and if you can remove that, you'll be more successful. And you'll probably find that too for a lot of different controls, not just for heat stress, but other things as well. All right, now we're going to look at some ways to control heat stress. All right, so we've got ventilation, air cooling, fan, shielding, and insulation. So basically, we're looking at implementing the hierarchy of controls like we would with any identified hazard. So these are some engineering controls. Ventilation. So here's an example of some general ventilation. So if you can open up, right, your indoor environment to the outdoor environment, get some basic air circulation in there, that helps. If you can locate them in a spot that physically makes sense, like up top where heat rises, that's a good thing. If you can open up windows or portals that allow cross drafts, that's a good thing, right? Now, sometimes a facility or a building might not be designed that way. You might be doing indoor painting activities or, IUPAT activities like, installing floors, things like that, where you might not have these systems set up yet. It might make it more difficult. Then we've got, air cooling or tempering, right? So we've got, HVAC systems where you can condition the air. What does air conditioning actually do to the air? Does anybody know? How does it make you feel cooler?
It lowers the humidity.
Yep. And it does that because we pass it through something called a condenser unit. So we're taking that air and we're squishing it together. And when we do that, what happens to the water vapor? Gets pushed out, right? Warm air can actually hold more water, because what happens when you heat, what happens to the air molecules when you heat it up? They move apart,
Expand.
right? Yeah, they expand. So if they expand, you can actually have more space in between there to fit water molecules. That's why in Orlando, I have to prepare for the humid environment when I go down there. So if you're in the winter, we usually say, oh, we're in the winter, it's colder, it's drier air. That's because the air just slows down, it gets pushed closer together, so there's less space for water vapor to get in, so it's drier. So that's what's happening with, air conditioning units. You're actually forcing that air to a direction where it's going to be condensed and water is going to be sucked out, and so that you're putting drier air back into that environment. And it's allowed to remove that sweat from your body so you feel better. Fans. Nuno, is that how I pronounce your name?
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned fans, right? So
Yes.
we've got some fans, depending upon what kind they are, they might just be pushing regular ambient air, or they might be pushing misted air. You have to know what kind of air, though, you're dealing with to do that. So if I've got a very dry environment, it makes sense to blow cold water vapor on me, because I know that cold water vapor is going to get on my skin. It's going to absorb some of that heat through conduction, and then it's going to evaporate. But if I am in Orlando and I'm at Disney, walking through Animal Kingdom and they blow that mist on me does not help me whatsoever, because it's already wicked humid down there. But what are they doing? They're driving me to get more cold drinks at $5, which I do happily when I'm down there. So you want to be able to evaluate how you're using the fan and what kind of fan apparatus you're using. So you have to be able to assess that environment. So just to set these things up, willy-nilly or half-ass, as my mother would say, not a good idea. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right fan setup for the right environment. Insulation can reduce the effects of conductive heat, right? So you can insulate something that's producing heat to prevent that worker from getting that heat to begin with. Might be harder to do in some construction trades. That's usually something a little easier to do when we're in industry. Shielding can protect workers from radiant heat. These things are amazing. People can actually survive, a flyover from a wall of wildfire. They might get burned, but they can survive. Administrative controls. Any comments or questions about engineering controls? All right, Jesse, you mentioned something like this maybe, right? This might be a smaller version of what you're talking about. But is there a way that we can administer some policies out there to prevent heat strain from starting to build up? Signs, right? Danger, heat stress area, heat stress protective clothing or equipment required, heat stroke or other heat related illness may occur. This is a NIOSH wording for a recommended heat sign. Acclimation or acclimatization, it's a key component for reducing heat related illnesses. Now there's some cool science behind this, so let's get into this. Cal OSHA acclimatization findings shed light on its importance. So this is from their 2005 study. So 80% of the heat-related illnesses occurred in the first 4 days. Almost half of them occurred on the first day. So that tells me that folks weren't acclimated yet to this environment. 34 incidents occurred on days 2 to 4. And then days 5 all the way out to 2 weeks, you had a very few amount. And then 16% occurred way down the line. So this tells me that these folks who suffered an illness on that day, were not acclimated. This is NIOSH's suggested acclimation schedule. So we've got an experienced heat worker. So maybe you've got somebody who worked in Arizona and then they travel to work in Nevada. So that's an experienced heat worker, right? So it's the same kind of environment. That wouldn't be the same though if you had a worker from Nevada travel down to Orlando to work. Different kinds of heat, right? We went from a dry high heat to a humid high heat. So depending upon if you're experienced or you're new to that environment, on day 1, you would work in that environment for 50 or 20%, 60 or 40%. Then day 4, you get to 100 to 80%. Finally, day 1, NIOSH says you can work 100% in that environment. What does acclimating a worker do? Okay, so you build up your ability to handle heat. So you're not just dumping that person in there for a full shift. You're doing it by some gradient. When your body gets used to the heat, your sweat becomes more efficient. So you're not going to have to sweat as much to dump the same amount of heat. So you become better at sweating, if you would. Blood flow to the skin is reduced. More blood is available to the muscles. So because you're more efficient, your blood is actually going to be able to dispense the heat better. So it can be used to take away those toxins from byproducts of work, deliver oxygen and other nutrients to your muscles, etc. So it works better. Heart rate is more stable, heart stroke volume increases, and blood volume increases. So you will actually pump more blood for every pump than you would if you were not acclimated in that environment. So this is some very telling information from the Department of Navy. This is from their study. So on day 1, they found out that 13% of folks had, by the end of day 1, acclimated achievement. It took 21 days, of working in that environment before 99.6% of all of their subjects were acclimated. So it didn't happen in 5 days like NIOSH said, right? So they found it took 21 days for almost 100% of the workers to be acclimated. That's a long time. And by 14 days, roughly 80% of their workforce was acclimated. So it takes a while. Ooh. All right, speak with, a supervisor, union steward, if you are trying, or if you're on an acclimation schedule and you just feel like you're not getting it. When I first started running again, and God, I hate running, but I like life, so I want to try to be around. So I figured I'm going to do some other activities that'll help me do that. Luckily, I found these crazy Spartan race things because for some other reason, I find running more tolerable if I get to pick things up and throw stuff and swing on monkey bars. Anyway, it was about 3 months and I'm like, damn it, I still feel like I'm not getting in any better shape running. What the hell's going on? It wasn't making any sense. I didn't respond as I would respond to other stimulus. So after some discussion with a medical professional, found out my vitamin D was low and I was not allowed to acclimate to that running environment like I would have once my vitamin D intake went back up and I got a supplement. Wow, I was in good shape all of a sudden. So you might not be acclimating to that environment. And if you feel like you're not getting with the program, find out about it because it might be something like in my case, I had a deficient vitamin, right, that I needed. So make sure you bring that up. Don't just try to tough it out and stick it out. Being acclimated does not reduce your body's requirement for water. You still need to drink, water and do salt replacement if you start to lose it through sweat. So make sure you keep hydrated. Dehydration can lead to some significant issues, right? Water loss is serious. Normally with light activity, we lose about 2 to 3 quarts of water a day. And we replace that without much effort. In hot weather though, you can lose 2 to 3 gallons of sweat. So imagine if you're working on the job and it's really hot out and you lose 2 to 3 gallons of sweat. How much does a gallon of water weigh? Anybody know off the top of their head?
About 9 pounds.
Yeah, almost. It's like 8.5 pounds. So imagine losing 18 pounds of water a day when you're really working hard and it's super hot out. That's not good. The problem is, again, our body's not that great at what it does. Our thirst mechanism is not sensitive enough. So we can actually lose about 2% of our body weight in water before we feel thirsty. And remember back to these folks here, the ACGIH, they had a stipulation for removal from work if you lost 1.5% of your body weight. Well, according to the science, if we lose up to 2% before we feel thirsty, you better have a scale on site because you might not know when you lost 2.5 or 2% of your body weight, right? Or I should say 1.5% of your body weight because you might not be thirsty yet. So don't rely on yourself to determine whether or not you're losing too much water or if you're suffering heat stress. Again, don't ignore it, right? If you feel thirsty, obviously get something to drink, but don't wait till you feel thirsty. And you've probably heard this before. If you feel thirsty, it's too late, right? You need to hydrate constantly. Like when I do a competition of some kind, I am overhydrating for a week. Like I'm going to the bathroom constantly because I want to make sure when I'm doing my event, I'm not going to miss out because, I'm losing too much water because I didn't have enough in me. So if you know that you're coming into a high heat environment for work, whether you've got a heat wave coming up, whether or not you're going to be doing an activity that is more strenuous than you normally do, make sure you're getting enough water beforehand. Don't just wait to the day of that activity or heat wave. And again, your employer is responsible for developing a heat reduction illness program for you. But it doesn't hurt to try to overload your body and make sure you've got enough water in you, right? This is what OSHA recommends, that workers drink a cup of water every 15 to 20 minutes. Again, if you just tell people to do that, they're not going to. There's a number of studies where there was plenty of water available and workers were told, hey, make sure you take a water break every hour, and it wasn't done. People are actually found to be dehydrated. We've got a number of studies that show this. It's better if you schedule a break, you know, whether it's at the top of the hour, whatever. Schedule a break so that workers go get water. And, you know, avoid things that help reduce the amount of water in your body, like alcohol, caffeine, which is a diuretic, helps you go to the bathroom, or high sugar drinks. Train workers, you know, about heat stress. Schedule work in cooler parts of the day or in cooler season. Mike, you mentioned this, right? So it might be that you're stuck with a couple back-to-back 100-degree days. Maybe you can do that at night, or, you know, start the work shift at 5 o'clock. What's the time of day usually when the sun is at the highest point, when it's hottest? What's that time frame?
Here, I think it's between 10 and 2, I
Yeah,
believe.
10 and 2.
10
Yeah,
and 2.
10 and 2, 11 to 3, depending upon where you are, you know, in the longitude and latitude of the globe. So if you can schedule work outside of that bound, that's a good thing. Breaks are important for workers. If you can, find a break area that's going to help them dump heat. Underneath shade is great. You know, if you can do it in an air-conditioned environment, even better. This is the ACGIH work rest schedule for acclimated workers. So these are folks that are accustomed to that work environment, okay? Not a new worker. And again, the work demand, I mentioned this before, right? You have to accurately classify that. So don't, you know, go, you know, don't let a supervisor, label heavy sanding as light work, right? Make sure that you've got worker input, that you're accurately classifying workload. So depending upon, and these here are adjusted values. So these are in degrees Celsius and they're adjusted. So they took it with the wet bulb globe temperature device and then they adjusted it for any clothing. So depending upon what it is, you know, you can either work all the time or you've got some combination of a work rest schedule, 75-25, 50-50, or 25-75. And that includes getting into your work, walking to the work, and doing the work. These here are acclimated worker wet bulb globe temperature exposure limit comparisons. This again is from the American Industrial Hygiene, and they look at ACGIH, AIHA, OSHA, ISO, and NIOSH values, and there is some difference. So this is something, especially if you're, if you're a designated local union or district council health and safety, officer, get used to some of this stuff so that if you're presented with it on site from a health and safety person, from the contractor or the employer, you can know what they're using and you can be able to compare that. This is a work rest combination and water consumption table from the, I think this is from the Army. So this goes a step further. So this gives them a work rest table based on the kind of work that they're doing. And it also gives a water intake as well. So this goes a step further with looking at water intake. Workers in conditions that increase risk of heat stress should be personally monitored. So again, this is a qualified person that would do something like this. At the Department of Energy sites that I consulted on for labor, it was always an occupational nurse that they would have. This is personal monitoring that can be done by checking the heart rate and the recovery rate, oral temperature, or extent of body water loss. So again, this is something that a qualified person would want to do. ACGIH suggests frequency of that monitoring. If you've got normal work clothing compared to impermeable clothing like a Tyvek coated suit, you've got different time intervals for doing those physiological readings. Clothing, as we discussed, can significantly inhibit your body's heat transfer. The Department of Energy's Health, Safety, and Security follows the guidelines recommended by ACGIH for different types of clothing. So again, if you're an IUPAT member working on a DOE site, you would be following the ACGIH recommendations. This is pretty telling. If you're putting on suits, you know, it's hotter inside. Well, this study showed you how much hotter it was inside. So this here is what the normal ambient temperature was, this blue line. This pink line here, or light violet line, was what the temperature was in the actual suit measured. And then this dark maroon line was the temperature if that person moved into the sun. So we can see at 70 degrees Fahrenheit ambient temperature, inside the suit was 80, in direct sunlight was 93. Look what happens if you moved up to 80. And again, for me, 80 degrees outside feels kind of nice. You know, I like that. 91 degrees, so 11-degree difference inside that impermeable suit. 104 degrees if they were working in direct sunlight. So when you're putting people in different types of clothing and suits to protect them from, you know, chemical exposure, you are increasing their heat risk in there. So you've got to plan for that. And you've got to make sure that the employer has planned for that. These here are NIOSH recommended temperature adjustments for clothing. We've got Celsius in degrees Fahrenheit from normal clothing to limited use vapor barrier coveralls like a Tyvek coated suit. So look at this, adding 18 degrees Fahrenheit for an adjustment if you're wearing like Tyvek suits. That's a big difference. This is going to surely bump you into a different category of work rest if you're working in, you know, 70-degree wet bulb globe temperature adjustments. Protective encapsulating and impermeable liquid resistant clothing and heat stress. So there are a number of studies that looked at what this actually does to workers. There's not a whole heck of a lot out there. There are some. Basically, you know, this one here, Turner, showed that there's not really consensus on what you should adjust worker, wet bulb globe temperature limits to. One found a 10 degrees Celsius adjustment for encapsulating protective suits, like a level A suit or a level B suit with an open air hood. NIOSH and ACGIH say that, look, if you're wearing that stuff, just monitor. Do physiological monitoring of them at a regular interval. Don't leave it up to chance. The buddy system is a good idea. Again, you can look out for each other, right? Protective clothing and heat can increase radiation exposure. So Reichelt, Clay, and Eichhorst, they looked at 68 cases in this basic incident database reporting system for the Department of Energy sites. And they found that in the 68 cases, 84% of them identified hot, humid, or damp conditions, okay, for radiation contamination. So most involved strenuous work with perspiration. Clothing or water-resistant clothing often fails to protect during demanding work. So as you're saturating the clothing with your sweat, right, or potentially hot, humid environment, and both, you're going to be opening it up to transferring radiological contamination from outside of that suit to your skin. In fact, they found that you know, some of the incidents actually had 4 layers of clothing on to protect them from radiological contamination. That created a heat incident, it soaked the clothing, and it allowed for contamination to occur. PPE can reduce heat stress as a last resort. You know, there's a couple of different things here that we have shown. My son talked me into buying a couple of these when we were at the parks one year. And it's good if it's dry and not humid out. But if it's humid out, it doesn't work as well because it's difficult picking up that, you know, that wet heat that you've got already on your skin because you've got a wet surrounding air environment. This is an example of a ice cooling vest study that was done at different body temperatures. So what they found was that at 18 degrees Celsius, wearing a cooling vest compared to a non-cooling vest allowed them to work for 120 minutes. Fairly close. So there was no statistical significant difference here. When they started to increase the work environment temperature, they found that for folks who wore the cooling vest actually allowed them to work statistically significantly more than folks who did not have a cooling vest. It does add a little bit of body weight, but it did reduce the heat strain to workers who wore it in higher temperatures. So there is some benefit to that, but not all the time. There was a study done with those Cortec pills that looked at being able to use a body cooling suit, and they found some benefit to it. And then this is a device, I looked at this a number of years ago. I have not found any peer-reviewed study on it. This is the whole, idea that if you can cool down certain high blood flow areas of your body, like your palms of your hands, your wrists, the back of your neck, in this case, the palms of your hands. If you can distribute some cool material to that, you can maybe dump the heat that way. So this is what this technology is. It's still out there, it's available, but I haven't seen any peer-reviewed study on it. So it needs some more study, but it's a promising thing anyway. That's it for the actual module. I should say the class. Any comments or questions? Nothing? All right, what I'd like to do is I just want to go over the activity that we have that you could do with students. Let's see, I'm going to. Oh, wrong activity. I'm going to share my screen again here. All right, can folks see this? It should say IUPAT 4-hour heat stress course final activity.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, what did I do? I zoomed in somehow. I didn't mean to. Oh well. I designed the course, for 4 hours face-to-face. So about 2.5 to 3 hours, instructor facilitated class, and then, an hour to an hour and a half hands-on activity, depending upon the size of your class. So, 50 minutes to introduce this activity and actually work on it, and then 40 minutes per report back. The more groups you have, the longer it's going to take you to do report back. So basically, it's going to allow participants to use the wet bulb globe temperature measuring device in different scenarios. What I did is I described 5 different jobs for the IUPAT. I've got members working with Teamsters to unload multiple trailers of trade show equipment. The work must be done quickly over 3 days to ensure setup deadlines are met. The conference is located in Orlando Convention Center. Since I've been there and attended a Star Wars event, I know it. And it takes place the second week of June, right? A time when humidity levels would be up. Another one I've got, a glazer is placing windows in a 1-story office building structure. She has 1 apprentice working with her throughout the day when needed. The rest of the time, the work apprentice is working indoors and outdoors, cleaning up construction waste. This work will take 4 days to complete. Another one I've got, mostly outside. IUPAT radiological workers removing radiological contaminated coatings from concrete structures at Hanford, Washington. If you don't know, that's out in the desert, using handheld and walk behind scarifiers. So here I've got another example, and they're dressed out in some PPE. I've got one, a painting crew is on a rooftop on a 30-story hotel in Vegas, rigging swing stages. The task will take approximately 2 days. Thank Ken for that one. I said, Ken, give me something to do in Vegas. You are using oil-based paint to coat dozens of steel doors, jambs, and casing in a large complex of a storage unit building. The HVAC system, which feeds only conditioned units in the lobby offices, is not operational yet. So here's an example. You're working indoors. Not everything is up and running yet. And then this is mostly inside. 2 workers are entering a confined space to remove old coatings and recoat large above-ground storage tanks. And then I've got the rest of the scenario there. What I would do is I would take the wet bulb globe temperature device, 1 per each group. Or if you've only got access to a couple, you split the groups up. And I would locate these in different spots. I put one inside a car one time. I put one inside a vestibule from a double doorway system into an office building. I put one up on a ladder in full sun. I put one in the shade underneath an umbrella. So there's different ways that you can set these up. Let the students take measurements, and then what they're going to do is they're going to go back and they're going to then apply that measurement to this work scenario and then use one of the tools, the ACGI HTLV. They could use, the NIOSH one, the Army one, whatever they want to do, as long as they justify it, and then come up with a work rest schedule, and then identify a basic plan. Okay, I know that, it's taking into account this kind of day, full sun, maybe I put up, a shade, something like that, whatever they want to do. If they can complete that activity and you think it's pretty reasonable what they did and they were able to use the device accurately, I think they did a good job picking up, different aspects of the class. Because we're not just asking them questions, we're actually asking them to use the controls that they learned, the heat environments that we discussed, right? And apply those things to measurements that they took. So that's the activity. You definitely want to leave enough time for students to do this in your class. Again, like in Zoom, it's not as much fun, it's hard to do, but if you're face-to-face, you can get, these wet bulb globe temperature devices. You can get more expensive ones than what we got. We can get cheaper ones than what we got, but it would add a lot of value to making sure that, the students understood the material. And I think that this is a better, signifier of that than if we were to have given them a test for this course. With that said, that's it. Anybody have any comments, questions, anything I can ask about delivering the class, the materials, anything that I left maybe a little bit unsure of?
Hey, Bernie, do you know how much the devices go for? You said you kind of got a middle of the road one. What can we expect when we go out and try to purchase them?
It just so happens we have the person who got us a deal on the call, on the thing. Hey, Nicole, do you remember what you paid for them?
No, I don't, but I'll look it up because I love a deal. So
I was shocked. It was such a good deal. I said, get two. No, we got either 2 or 3 of them. So usually what I'm trying to do is if I get something, for the IFTI HS department, I'll get one to have with me, one for the training center in Hanover and one for Ken. So, if you're teaching a class, I don't know what our policy is yet for loaning this stuff out, but we can probably get it out to you. And then you could always rent them. But if you're in an area that's going to be at an increased risk for heat illness, even if it's seasonal, like New York City, I would consider maybe getting one of these. So you can at least go out and do some spot checks for your members out on sites. I'd also be happy to come out and do them in non-pandemic times as well. And I'm sure Ken would as well. What'd you get, Nicole?
I can't find it, but I think it was like $1,300. Wasn't it $1,300?
Yeah.
And I think they're normally $1,800.
That sounds like it's jogging my memory.
Yeah, me too. And Adam, I can get back to you once I find it. I can shoot you the exact model that we got as well, just so you have it. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I can send it out to you, no problem.
I just kind of wanted to have an idea.
Yep. All this pressure, I can't find it.
No problem.
And I guess if you guys didn't have any other classes or questions for Bernie, I will pull up the old LMS or give you guys some time if you want to log into the LMS.
Yeah, just
the materials as well. So Bernie, keep going and I'll.
Yeah, so just a couple of things. Here's just a couple of other resources that you can get. And here's a fun picture of me. So the story behind this was a race that was 12 miles. The one before, I actually beat 87% of 5,000 racers. And I suck at distance. I was so happy with myself. I trained for another 2 months. I did the next one. It just so happened to be 10 degrees hotter on this race day than what my normal training was. And it killed me. I thought I was going to die. I said, oh my God, I thought I was getting better at these. What the hell? So just a 10-degree difference, even though I was from what my friends tell me, I was in pretty good shape. It killed me. So just imagine if this happens, if you get a heat wave or something like that, you know, for your workers out there. I mean, it can really throw stuff off. So you want to make sure that employers have a heat-related illness plan. I approve this message. So thanks, folks, for taking this class. As I've said before, you know, you are all agents of change in the work environment. I think that you can get no better bang for your buck than doing, you know, a really good basic health and safety and awareness level training. You've got an opportunity here to help a lot of folks out by delivering this kind of training. So if you want to do this in the future, that's a good thing. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Bernie.
I'll definitely email you some pictures.
Yes, please do so. And my son's really interested in it too, because he wants to do props and stuff like that. He said for a career, he's really interested in this. So.
Oh yeah, that's I've done a lot of that stuff. Actually, I was working in Star Wars right before they opened it too.
No, you're killing me. Now you're killing me.
Star Wars right before.
So we were gonna go, you know, in June, right as soon as school ended. I had reservations to Olga's. We were ready to go. I had my plan. And then I'm like, I won't cancel it yet. Maybe this will go away. And I knew in the back of my mind, not going away. And then we get to May, I'm like, so yeah, we didn't get to go yet.
Yes, I know it is really cool. And it's like the two rides they have, the one that opened first is cool, but the second ride they have that opened more recently is like one of the cool, the technology of the ride is really crazy. The way the ride cars move around, it's like, they're like self-driving cars essentially, but they're quiet and they look like they're hovering. It's hard to even describe, but it's really cool in there.
Well,
Sure.
I'll have to pass it on to my kids, because that's the first things my kids ask me. Did the IPA, did the unit, did they do the painting for that Star Wars? I said, I don't know, I'll ask them.
Yep,
Cool, thank you.
no problem.
All right, Nicole, what do you got for us? Uh-oh,
Sorry about y'all.
I couldn't stand my voice anymore.
Yeah, can you all see my screen here? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Good, okay, so here, obviously, there's the LMS, right? If you can dust off how you get to your survey, you can hit the word course and it'll alphabetize your courses. If you look for FTI 1146, you want to hit that green go button, and then you want to start your survey. So it'll be the second one down. In the meantime, while you're looking for that, I also wanted to show you within the courses in the LMS, this is all of the information that Bernie has prepared for you guys to be able to teach your heat stress classes individually. Bernie, I don't know if there's anyone in here that you want to specifically point out to everybody, but these are the documents. You can see it's pretty hefty lift. There's 15 different handouts for you, as well as today's PowerPoint, the activity, and anything that you could really want as far as that goes for teaching your class.
Yeah, no, I mean, some of these things are just like 1-2 page fact sheets. Some of them are more in depth, you know, documents and manuals. So this should be a good amount of information for you guys to get a good, you know, foundation to be comfortable teaching this. That's it.
Nice, excellent.
Now I get to go off and actually do a trail run with my kids and watch them blow me away. That seems to be the way of things these days.
Hey, Bernie, I love the fact that you've done the Spartan races. I've never done a Spartan race, but I've done a couple of Tough Mudders.
Oh yeah.
That kind of stuff, just, I love it. It's just great to get out